Tetragrammaton.
Tell me about doing gigs with Peter and Gordon, just what the world was like then.
Well, the beginning, would have been us walking into coffee bars and stuff and saying, do you ever have entertainment? Or spotting one that did and saying, can we do one night for nothing and you see if you like us? So we did a couple of pubs, coffee bars, a place called Tina's Bar. We used to do it at lunchtime. We got
At lunchtime?
Lunchtime.
Amazing.
We had a lunchtime gig and we would get a free meal and a free pint of beer and a pound each, which was a pretty good deal. And we kept all of it. That was the difference. And then eventually, of course, post Peter and Gordon, a post hit record, you'd be playing all kinds of places. In England, suddenly you'd be on package tours, same as America, but not as much, not as exciting.
So how long would a set be on a package tour?
15 minutes, 20 minutes.
Wow. So 3 or 4 songs?
3 or 4 songs. Well, they varied because when we were like the Dick Clark Caravan of Stars, which was a big one,
Yeah.
is memorable. A lot of acts on the bill. But the one we found a poster of one where we were actually the headliner, which was, ephemeral because it was usually who had the biggest hit that week, And it was us, Tom Jones, who was probably on his first single, and we were probably on our second hit or something, which is why we were headlining. The Shirelles, who we were in awe of course, and Brian Hyland, Ronnie Dove, what's his name? Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me. Mel Carter, people like that. And we're all on the same show, which was fantastic, all crammed in.
Fantastic.
And then the most drastic were the Murray the K shows in New York, where you do 5 shows a day, but you only do like 1 song or 2 if you're big. We did 2. That we were co-headlining with Wilson Pickett.
Incredible.
Which was amazing because you got a mixed audience. And we would close the daytime shows and he would close the nighttime shows. And it was amazing. We were so excited, of course. These were our heroes. So someone said, Wilson Pickett wants to say hello. It was like, oh my God, And you go up there and he's sitting in this kind of throne thing, and with a big entourage. And of course, Gordon and me, it was just, our roadie who came from Yorkshire and no thrones and no entourage. we could have gone, that's how it's done,
And would you have been about the same age?
As Wilson Pickett,
Yeah.
I wonder, probably. Yeah. I don't really know.
Everybody's kids at this time. Would you say everyone are
Oh,
kids?
yeah, totally. I mean, our first record came out in 1964, so I was 20. But all the pre-record release stuff was all 18, 17, 18, 19. Because we met at school,
Yeah.
And the weird part was, of course, that suddenly they were putting us ahead of the Shirelles on these bills, And of course, for us, America was the real thing. We were all fake, And the weirdest part about the whole business is that we created all these fakes in our mind, and I mean, pretty good fakes, but sold them all back to the original people,
Yeah, that was the British invasion.
The British invasion. Yeah. I mean, remember we were playing Denver one time, Red Rocks, some big bill in Red Rocks, and it wasn't until we got there, because one of the most things we were most excited about was that Chuck Berry was on the bill.
Wow.
And we'd never seen him live. Or maybe might have seen him actually on a tour in England. But anyway, there we are arriving, and we discover that we're the headliners.
Unbelievable.
And we kind of went, no. You got this all wrong, You invented this music, and he invented most of it. And so we were making all this fuss, saying, we please don't make us close the show after Chuck Berry. And of course, it turned out Chuck Berry didn't give a shit. Chuck Berry wanted to get home early. He didn't want to close the show, and we had to do it, because without his cooperation, obviously, we couldn't force him to close. So that's where he kind of went, oh, so that's the way it is. He just wanted to get paid.
And did you get to meet all these people?
Yes.
Amazing.
We did. Briefly. I mean,
yeah, but any lasting impression from any of the people that you met over the years that were just interesting people? What was Chuck like?
Abrupt, short.
It was business.
Friendly.
Business.
Yes.
But
he wasn't unfriendly, and I think he knew who we were. He knew we were on the bill, and he knew we had a hit record and stuff. The weirdest one probably was when I went to a jazz club to see Roland Kirk. There was another weird thing, in London, I had all my copies of Downbeat already marked with the clubs I wanted to go to, and I knew who was playing, and this was such a big deal to us. And when we went into these clubs, of course, I remember it was Bob Brookmeyer and Stan Getz, and for me it was like such a big deal. But we walked in and there were people, everyone's talking and drinking and, this music sort of, and I went, oh my God, that's them, Whereas later, of course, when Thelonious Monk came to London, which I did see, it was the festival hall, it was silent, it was, full of admiration. So it was just odd that he was America taking all this music for granted, it was extraordinary. But I went to see Roland Kirk, and who, if you remember, was famous. He would play like several instruments at once. It was breathtaking. Amazing show. And someone had obviously told him, somebody figured out who we were and told him. So he was trying to say the right thing. So he said something about, but he had it all muddled, and he said something about the Beatles. Not that we were the Beatles, but somehow, it was him being very sweet and trying to like acknowledge the fact that someone had told him these people with the #1 record were in town, but he knew nothing, And I kept wanting to go, it's okay. We don't expect you to. You're magic idols and heroes, Of course you don't know who we are, and of course I do know who you are, and that's how it's supposed to be. But it didn't seem that way.
Was it unusual that at your age that you were enthralled with American music, or was that what young English kids
universal.
liked?
That was what we all liked.
Yeah.
Particularly rhythm and blues, of course.
Yeah.
I used to go every Monday night to Ken Collier's jazz club, just off the Charing Cross Road, because Monday night was R&B night, and the house band was the Rolling Stones, and I used to go and see them every Monday. Before they'd ever made records, I remember Mick on stage talking about, we just got to make our first single, which was Come On, the Chuck Berry song. And, it was coming out next week, and please go and buy it, and that kind of thing.
And at that time they were playing all covers, yes?
All covers. I mean, I always point out to people, even the Beatles, before they started writing their own songs, which it turned out they did rather well, but until that time, I don't think they ever sang an English song that I can think of. And the only English songs that were ever hits in America were oddities. It was like, does your chewing gum lose its flavor on the bedpost overnight? Or Stranger on the Shore, Acker Bilk, that was the pre-British invasion. But our rock stars, like Cliff, never made it,
I guess really until Bob Dylan and the Beatles, everybody did covers. Like that's what, like in the Frank Sinatra model, you sang standards.
Yes, or you sang something that Carole and Jerry had written for you.
Yes.
That kind of thing. Or Neil Diamond, or one of those, the right to order people who were so brilliant, And is one or the other.
Did you ever get to go to the Brill building and see that world?
No, not really. I later on got to meet everybody who I was part of it. And we used to pay a lot of attention when we bought records to the names in the little brackets under the song title, because we knew that these were the magic people who came up with this music that was so brilliant. And that's why when I finally met Carole, which I did through Danny Korchmar, who had played with Peter and Gordon, he was in a band called the King Bees. And when we toured America, the promoters would hire a band, or actually several bands, sometimes in different areas of the country, to be the backup band. And of course, they didn't go out and hire terrific individual musicians. They just looked for some out-of-work group who would do it on the cheap and learn the song. They'd say, just learn these songs, which was fine. And some of them were fairly good, some of them were awful. One of the good ones was the King Bees. Danny Korchmar and I became great friends. And of course, he's the one who introduced me to James later on. And he introduced me when I came out to LA finally to Carole. He'd been in a band called The City with Carole. So my first move was a big fan grovel about all the songs she'd written, all of which I knew. And people didn't realize. I mean, she had so many hits then.
So many.
It was like Diane Warren plus,
Yeah.
And and not only that, but suddenly to switch
Yes.
from Diane Warren Plus to being a leading member of the singer-songwriter movement.
Amazing.
It's extraordinary.
Amazing. So tell me more about London in the 60s. Just what was the atmosphere, and what was it like I'll call it British invasion. It wasn't the British invasion for you, but maybe pre-rock and roll
Yeah.
into rock and roll.
It was fantastic. I mean, it was London. First of all, I always think that the 60s grew so much out of the 50s, because people forget that the 50s were so different in London and in America. London was rationing till 1956. Shortages, they took rationing off individual items one at a time. The last thing to go, whatever it was 56. It was very much a tighten your belt, spirit of the Blitz, and Britain was a pretty primitive kind of country. Something like half of Britain didn't have indoor plumbing or
Was there a memory of the memory of the war?
Yes.
Was
bomb sites everywhere still, and a lot of rebuilding to be done, and a lot of people had obviously lost family in the war, so the war was an omnipresent theme, and the general shortages and grimness of. So I think part of it was sort of us deciding, we're going to do something different here. We admire everything our parents accomplished, but we'd rather have fun and dress up in silly clothes and stuff. Yeah. And I think that the sort of willful desire to have a good time grew out of the fact that for a while nobody was allowed to have a good time because we were too busy, beating the Nazis, which was a thing, And admittedly, we had some help from some allies, but you never really had to get your hands dirty in the grimness of it, except
Absolutely.
for losing people.
Absolutely.
But they didn't bomb New York or anything dramatic, and so it was very different, And America. That's our admiration for America became great because the Americans we met were all charming and funny and rich, by our standards. And obviously, as you know, the soldiers had the silk stockings that the girls wanted, and all the things that we didn't have, And so it was, I think, for quite a while, the war was an excuse for a lot of shortcomings that Britain had and took a while to recover from. So it was different. And musically, the music we had, some of the people were really good. I mean, I'm a Cliff fan. I was a Billy Fury fan. God knows I was a Dusty fan, which was sort of leaning into the British invasion. But we loved them all, but we didn't think of them as real rock stars, the real ones who were American. I was a child actor, and I, was in films where some of the people would be English movie stars. The first film I ever did, my father was played by Jack Hawkins, who you may remember is in Bridge on the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia and, Military Gentleman. And that was exciting. But the real excitement was that my mother was played by a real movie star, because my mother was played by Claudette Colbert.
Yeah.
And of course, she was a real movie star because she was American.
Yeah.
And we kind of went, that's the reason. We all knew movie stars come from Hollywood, rock stars come from America. That's how it was then. And that's what the Beatles changed completely.
Do you remember if it was, did you hear of Elvis before you heard of Chuck Berry and Little Richard?
Yes.
Elvis was first.
Yes, I think so. And first was Heartbreak Hotel. That was huge.
How old would you have been?
I don't know. What year do you think Heartbreak Hotel was?
I have no idea. I'm not good with
Yeah.
dates. Just how old did you feel?
16, 17.
Yeah.
And that might be right.
So it was not long after hearing that you start making music.
No, not at all. And, we used to do in it several Elvis songs. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we did Elvis songs. And then, obviously, we did Buddy Holly songs and Everly Brothers, of course. As a duo, you know who your favorites are. It's one area in which there's no discussion. You ask Simon and Garfunkel or Chad and Jeremy or John and Paul, who are you trying to copy? And it's always the same band.
Yeah.
If we'd met a couple more people at school who wanted to play, we might have been a group like everybody else. But we sounded good, just the two of us, and we stuck to it.
Did you sing Everly Brothers songs in the beginning?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. And of course, one of our favorite Everly songs ties the whole thing together because it was Crying in the Rain,
Amazing.
Which was written by Carole King.
I'll never let you see the way my broken heart is hurting me. my pride, and I know how to hide all my sorrow and pain. I'll do my crying in the rain.
So it was
Amazing.
a Carole King song and an Everly Brothers song.
I didn't know she wrote that.
Yeah, she did with Howard Greenfield.
Wow.
Did the lyrics. So it wasn't Goffin and King.
Yeah.
It was Greenfield and King, as we discovered because we researched those names. And we didn't know who King was at all. It could have been Mr. King for all we knew. And eventually we found out about this amazing woman. She wrote Will You Still Love Me Tomorrow for the Shirelles when she was 18, and never looked back.
Unbelievable.
Just wrote one hit after another.
Unbelievable. And what a great piano player. Like just the feeling in her
Well,
piano
that's the
playing.
funny part, of course, because it was when I came to make Sweet Baby James, which we didn't have a title for yet, but which was going to be the first American album after the Apple album, which I'd done in London with English musicians, and which I'd decorated quite a lot with orchestration and stuff. I wanted to keep Sweet Baby James simple. And by then I'd heard exactly that, the original Screen Gems demos of all those Carole King songs. And I loved her piano playing. It was sort of the ultimate, not jazzy, not too fancy chords, but perfect and very soulful nonetheless. Piano playing. So when I first met Carole, I asked her if she would play on James's album, if she would give me a week to just be a studio person, which was asking a lot because I knew she was, a goddess of songwriting. And I knew that she was planning gradually to make her own record as well.
She hadn't made Tapestry yet.
No.
Wow.
Not at all. She'd done, I think, this album, The City, which was her and Cooke and Charlie Larkey. And I think that was that, but she hadn't done Tapestry at all. No, Tapestry came after that, and that's the whole You've Got a Friend story, which tied Tapestry into our world. But anyway, to backtrack for a second, so I fell in love with her piano playing, and she said yes. She didn't know who James was. She came over to my house. At that point, I was in a rented house down on Longwood Avenue in Hancock Park, corner of Olympic Boulevard, $400 a month with a guest house and a pool. And that she came over there to rehearse, to meet James. And they met. I sat her down and asked her to just play. And they started just making up stuff and playing. And it was entirely magical. And I went, we found our piano player.
Did you have any kind of a tape recorder there?
No.
Ooh.
Sadly, no.
Would have been nice.
I know. No, I've got, because I remember I've got a picture of the room, and we had no furniture because I had no money. We had a rented piano, and there's a picture of James playing the piano with the cat. The cat was free, sitting on the piano. And but we rehearsed in the afternoon and went into Sunset Sound that night and cut the 3 or 4 tracks we'd worked out. Took a week.
Amazing.
We felt kind of guilty because, that we had a record deal where we got another $20,000 in front and $20,000 on delivery. And we made the whole album for like $7,600. And we kind of went, that was easy.
Well, it made it better. It's like, it's a funny thing. Like
exactly.
sometimes throwing more money at a project doesn't make it better.
Oh, exactly. And we were, as I say, we had no money to speak of. So there's that track on that album that's called Sweet for 20G. And people are always puzzled by it. For a while, there were all kinds of magical explanations. It was to get the $20,000 on delivery. James had said, I haven't got any more songs. We have to wait. And I said, well, you played me some good bits, and he said, well, none of them have turned into songs. They're not finished. And I said, well, could you play them to me? And he played them. And I said, well, let's string them together. And if you listen to it, they're distinctly 3 separate songs, different tempos, different keys. And so he put them all together. It's the only James Taylor song I ever had a hand in naming, because he said, what shall I call it? And I said, Sweet for 20G, so that we can collect the money. And and there it is on the record.
I can say someday I will be. When I catch a common cold, wanna hear a saxophone. When I let the good times roll, baby, slide me a bass trombone.
And as I say, people have kind of go, what mysterious, meaningful title was that? And I went, very simple.
Tell me about the other British invasion bands, like there was Dave Clark 5 and Herman's Hermits
Yes.
and Freddie and the Dreamers. There was a bunch of them.
Yes, I
What
mean,
was this? Tell me what the scene was like, and did it feel like a community of?
it sort of did. I mean, we used to run into each other on TV shows all the time. That's where you'd meet Freddie and the Dreamers, and it was when you do Top of the Pops, Thank You Lucky Stars, or Ready Steady Go. Ready Steady Go was the most fun because it was live. You played live. Most of them were lip sync, but that's where you met, and you'd occasionally meet in a place called the Blue Boar. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but going up and down the M1, which was Britain's first ever motorway. So whatever gig you were going to, providing if it was north of London, you took the M1 and they had one rest stop, which was open all night, which is a cafe. You could get egg and chips and stuff, and you'd go in there, and almost always there'd be another band in there, because everyone was zooming up and down the M1 playing all these various gigs. And I remember meeting, the Kinks in there, or gosh, I can't remember, the Yardbirds. Other people, you'd see them at the Blue Boar on the M1. It's got sort of legendary status. And eating greasy food and at 2 a.m. or something on your way back to London.
Would you get to see all those bands play live as well?
Sometimes. I mean, when you shared a bill with them, you did, for sure. And doing these TV shows, you did. But I think there was a distinction. I think the real bands everyone knew were kind of the Kinks, Zombies, Yardbirds, bands that you really wanted.
Zombies were so cool.
Yeah, that you
and
really
so different
wanted
than
to
everybody
see.
else.
Yes. They're still great.
Yeah.
Singing and playing, they're both great. And yeah, they're important bands. We were kind of in between. Then Freddie and the Dreamers and the bands, nobody really took that seriously, but he was a nice guy and they were catchy records and so on. And then Herman very cleverly took that sort of English musical thing, vaudeville aspect of it, and made them into hits.
Yeah. That was also a big influence on Paul's writing, the vaudeville.
Yes, absolutely. Your Mother Should Know and
Yeah.
all those kinds of things. Yes, I think maybe that's something that we added a bit to, when we took American rock and roll. And even Peter and Gordon finally succumbed when we did Lady Godiva. And I remember actually thinking when we were sent that song, I was the one kind of going, I don't know, it's a bit novelty record, and does this suddenly make us Freddie and the Dreamers, as it were. And nothing against them at all, but
Understood.
But Gordon was the one who said, don't be so snooty. It's quite funny and quite catchy. It might even be a hit. And it was a hit. And actually, when we do shows now, it's one of those ones that's much in demand. It was huge in Canada, I remember. We found a copy of the Chum Canadian chart when Lady Godiva was #1, which it wasn't in America for sure. But yeah, it's a fun song to sing too. I do that when I do shows.
I grew up
do that,
listening
yeah.
to classic rock radio, and you'd hear Lady Godiva all the time.
Yes.
It's a standard on American classic 60s music. It's one of the standards.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember this session. I kept trying to make it more like a Kinks record. I mean, the original, I don't know if you remember the beginning of Lady Godiva, but the record itself now just starts with pretty much bass and kick. It's just boom, 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 blinky, blink, 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 blink.
"17, a beauty queen, she made a ride that caused a scene in the town."
But originally, all that had horns and stuff on it. It was all the ba-ba-doo, be-da-ba-doo, even more novelty band than it was. And I took all that out against our producer's best wishes, but I felt strongly that just the boom boom stuff. And I was stealing it from Sunny Afternoon.
How great is
King's
Sunny
record,
Afternoon?
because
What
it's a
great
masterpiece. So I went, let's steal that. So that boom, 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 which no one's ever called me out on, but the beginning, was as close as I could get it to being a direct steal from how great Sunny Afternoon sounds. So I was trying to make it a little more Kinks clever and a little less totally vaudeville silly, But with whatever the compromise was, seemed to work.
Do you ever get to see the Zombies live?
Not back then, no. I've seen Colin and what's his name since then.
Rod Argent, maybe?
Rod, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then he had that big hit with the Denny Lane song that was my favorite Denny Lane song, was Say You Don't Mind. And then that became a hit for Rod Argent,
Yeah.
which is surprising.
Incredible keyboard player.
Brilliant keyboard player.
Yeah. I think he did a lot of sessions too.
probably.
I think so.
We had a lot of, you had a lot of people, interesting people playing on sessions then. Jimmy Page played on a couple of hours. And then the legendary guitar team at that time was Big Jim Sullivan and Vic Flick. And Vic Flick played he played the solo on Well Without Love. And he's, of course, the same guy who played dun 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 dun, played the Bond theme.
Wow.
And I forget which records Jimmy Page played on, but a couple of them. He was one of the guys who was around. And then there were also some guys that were sort of a bit older who were like from the previous team, but also were really good players.
So was there a big studio musician scene at that point in time?
I don't know, but yes, I think they were all working a lot. Yeah, I remember my favorite drummer was a guy called Kenny Clare, who was the drummer in the Johnny Danforth band. So he was
I don't know that band.
Johnny Danforth was a big jazz guy in England, very important in the British jazz scene, which is a very separate and as again a complete copy of the American jazz scene, but some wonderful, wonderful players. And Kenny Clare, who played on a couple of Peter and Gordon records, was a brilliant big band drummer and played all that. And we put some of that in there just because he did it so well.
High above the clouds in the Himalayan mountains grows a little-known superfood used by ancient warriors. This scarce elixir was referred to as the destroyer of weakness. It's called Shilajit. Mana Vitality makes Shilajit available in a proprietary combination with an all-in-one supplement made entirely from nature. Mana is ancient medicine blended with modern-day science and innovation. Made from 100% earth and ocean-sourced vitamins, minerals, and nutrients, including ocean plasma, dead sea ormus, and Himalayan Shilajit. Wild harvested at an elevation of 16,000 feet, Himalayan Shilajit is a powerful and natural biogenic stimulant. Dead sea ormus contains a group of essential minerals that enhance the energy flow in the microtubules inside living cells and even work to repair damaged DNA. Mana's ocean plasma is sourced off the coast of Tasmania and is solar evaporated for 3 years. 100% organic and plant-based, Mana is your daily source of health. Its essential nutrients and minerals enhance energy levels, vitality, sexual drive, cognitive function, and overall longevity. Visit manavitality.com today. From the highest mountains and the deepest oceans, ignite your body's potential with Mana Vitality.
I just learned from Graham Nash that skiffle music was based on American music, which
Completely.
I didn't know that because we didn't have skiffle.
No, I know.
Whereas for all of for the blues, for every other genre that was popular in the UK, we had the equivalent here.
Yeah, and I guess it's jug band,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and people forget about Lonnie Donegan, of course.
Yeah.
He was the big guy. I was talking to Jack White not long ago, and he turns out to be a huge Lonnie Donegan fan. He knew all his records and everything, and I kind of was so impressed because Lonnie Donegan fans are rare in America,
Yeah.
And it sort of figures that he would be somebody who got it,
And was he a movie star as well?
No, just he came out of the jazz scene.
I see.
He was the banjo player, and when I say banjo, it would be 4-string chinka chinka banjo, not 5-string bluegrass. In the Chris Barber jazz band, before skiffle was the trad scene, as they called it, which was traditional jazz, Dixieland to you. And Chris Barber was the biggest band. And the band was very big, and they do their set with all the horn section and everything. And then they would have in the middle of the show a section of Lonnie Donegan doing a couple of folk songs and stuff on his banjo with maybe the bass player and stuff. And that was the beginning of Lonnie Donegan, and to some degree, I think, the beginning of skiffle. And then Lonnie Donegan had Rock Island Line, which was massive, which is a Leadbelly song.
Dead or Alive also was a big one, I remember.
Yes, that's right. And then there were other skiffle groups like the Vipers, who were very good. But Lonnie Donegan was the king of skiffle, literally described as such. And it began with him. He would do a tiny segment in Chris Barber's jazz band evenings. I used to play in in a trad jazz band. I played bass very badly, but you could get away with it in a band. Mostly notable that the band leader and trumpet player was Adrian Lyne, the film director. So we've known each other forever.
Amazing.
Played together in a band, which was exciting.
What motivated your decision to move to California?
James. I had been to California, of course, several times on tour and to do TV shows and do shindig and whatever. And I loved California. It was amazing. I mean, you have to remember what British people are coming from. So, I mean, for me, literally, the contrast was so stark because one year I was a philosophy student at London University, King's College, London, so that, on a winter afternoon, I would be bicycling home from university in the dark, because by 4:00 in British winter it's dark, and the rain, And a year later, I was driving down Sunset Boulevard in a Mustang convertible, being recognized by beautiful women in the sunshine. And I kind of went, I think this is better. Call me crazy, but this seems like a lot more fun. So I knew I'd come back and live in America one day.
Yeah.
I knew even before Peter and Gordon, I had posters of the New York skyline on my bedroom wall.
Interesting.
And as I say, copies of Downbeat with Jazz Club Circle. I knew my America was in my future somewhere. And once I'd been here and it lived up to our expectations, because we dreamed of coming to America, and then to come and be chased around by teenage girls trying to tear your clothes off, it gets no better than that. Yeah, so California, the decision was part of the decision to manage James. In other words, producing and managing came to me in entirely different ways. Being a record producer was something I had an ambition to do in and of itself. Once I'd realized there was such a job, that you could have a job where you could hire brilliant musicians much better than yourself and tell them what to do. I thought, how cool is that? And as you well know, and it's extremely cool.
Yeah.
And that was an ambition, regardless of who it was. And so I first record I ever produced was a Paul Jones record. I don't know if you remember Paul Jones. He was the lead singer of Manfred Mann.
Oh, yeah.
In the doo-wah-dee-dee era.
Yeah.
There she was, just
yeah.
a walking. That guy, brilliant singer and one of the best harmonica players in the world. And so I produced his record. And by that time, Paul and I were already friends. So I asked Paul if he would play drums on it. So Paul McCartney played drums. Paul Samuel Smith from the Yardbirds played bass, who went on, to, of course, to produce Carly Simon and Cat Stevens. Nicky Hopkins played piano, and Jeff Beck played guitar.
Wow.
So I was taking no chances on my first record.
How great was that band?
It was a great band. It was a really good band. It's worth hearing. The record wasn't a big hit. It crept into the charts and crept out again, but it's good, worth hearing. But whereas managing was quite different. I was already producing James. We'd made the Apple album, came out, didn't do particularly well. We were just trying to decide what to do. Apple was falling apart. The Beatles were falling apart. We decided to leave and sort of jump ship. And so I decided to move to America because James and I had a conversation about management. It was clear to us that somebody needed to be his manager. We didn't know anyone we trusted to do it. So I said to James, well, I'll do it, And yes, I was kind of being bold and saying, how hard can it be? But I was also, having watched Brian Epstein, realized that one's instincts were correct, that it wasn't that hard if you had an amazing client,
Yeah,
But people often
and
say-
you cared, which is something that
And you cared.
That's a big difference.
And you wanted to cook, right?
Yeah, it wasn't just a gig. You love this artist.
Exactly. If you're going to go around saying my band's going to be bigger than Elvis, you better mean it,
Yeah.
And so I think I thought if you're reasonably intelligent, love your artist to the point in every sense of the word,
Yeah.
and not just trying to make a quick dollar. It becomes a matter largely of common sense. People do often say to me, what's the secret of being a great manager? And I do explain that, I inducted the first two managers into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because I knew them both and admired them both. And they were, not surprisingly, Brian Epstein and Andrew Lou Goldham. And I went, duh, what does this tell you? Secret of being a great manager is a great client. It doesn't mean that you couldn't screw it up if you tried. But, if you're going around telling everyone what a genius James Taylor is, it's easy because it's true.
Yeah.
And, my ambition was to convince people this is not just another long-haired folkie with an acoustic guitar. which is what you were. If you had long hair, blazers, guitar, you were a folk singer. Didn't matter if you never sang any folk songs. I mean, James did, but you were playing the folk clubs. That was your, the word singer-songwriter, oddly enough, had never been used in that context.
Interesting.
It hadn't been put together that way.
Interesting.
You could be a songwriter and a singer, but suddenly, oh, I'm a singer-songwriter. Now I've got a name for what I do.
And it was a whole movement
And
in
it
the
became
70s.
a movement.
Yeah.
They put James on the cover of Time magazine. And,
Yeah.
it was Joni, it was Neil, it was James. Then a minute later, it was Jackson and so on. And that was the singer-songwriter thing.
Well, let's go back because you talked
Yeah.
about Apple was falling
Yeah.
apart. Tell me about Apple from the beginning. Were you at Apple from the beginning?
Yes. Yeah,
Tell
I
me
was-
about the entire Apple story.
Okay. Paul and I were friends. Even after he moved out of our house, he lived with us for a couple of years on the top floor of our house. Then when he moved out to his mansion in Cavendish Avenue, where he still lives, that's when I mostly remember him talking about Apple. It was a Beatle collective idea, but it was mainly him, and the others were falling into place behind him. And he wanted to create a sort of entertainment company. And at that era, you may remember, it was before record companies started vying with each other for the title of artist friendly. That concept didn't really exist. I mean, the head of EMI was a man called Sir Joseph Lockwood. And when you walked into his office, you felt like you should bow, He was in a suit behind a big desk. He was Sir Joseph, and he was the boss. And everybody had that thing, which they kind of still have, of we don't accept unsolicited material, and no, don't bother us, go away. Now it's different. It's don't bother us until you've got 20 zillion followers, or, all those numbers. But back then they said, no, you need to have a lawyer or a manager to talk to us, and all that, very hands-off. And Paul was convinced that, if we just took a more amiable, accessible, hospitable attitude, and it was going to be records and films and television and all this other stuff. But so he asked
This
me.
also makes sense from Paul after the Beatles were rejected by everyone for a long time. So
That's right.
In his mind, it's like there's more of us out here.
That's right. That's a very good point.
It makes sense, It
does
makes
make
sense
perfect
for
sense.
that mentality.
The sad thing was, of course, that
It didn't happen.
didn't happen.
Yeah. Could it have happened?
Well, yes. I mean, I suppose it could have. I mean, the funny part is Apple now would kind of make a bit of sense to start a completely independent label that truly listened.
Yeah.
I had 4 or 5 people listen because we took ads saying, send us your music. And boy, did they ever.
Yeah.
But the depressing thing was we really got nothing out of those send-in tapes. I mean, and, a depressing percentage was people with this stacks of, for example, a giant stack of lyrics that don't scan and don't rhyme. And, I know John Lennon wants to write music for this, all my lyrics, and it's going to bring about world peace or whatever. And, and it was depressing how nutty some of it was, how bad some of it was, and what the percentage of actually, let's play this in an AMR meeting and then say no, that was a triumph, when there was something I actually thought I could play to the Beatles and say, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because we had weekly A&R meetings. I think the King of Fur came out of one of those meetings. Do you know about the King of Fur? An artist called Brute Force, who I believe is still around.
Wow, great.
And this is the only thing I think, could be wrong, but I think it's the only thing we ever played in an A&R meeting and actually went, let's sign it. We let's sign it because George thought it was hilarious. That it was a song, the lyrics of which largely consisted, I am the king of fur, I am the fur king. And we all laughed. George said, we have to put it out. We have to put it out. And of course, EMI and Capital went, no, you don't. And we went, yes, we do. And we had to get some other distributor to do it because EMI wouldn't do it. But it did come out. And there's a guy called Brute Force who might still be around.
It's a funny name.
It's a great name.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But I think that might be the only thing. Because we signed Mary Hopkin because we saw her on a talent show.
I see.
Twiggy actually saw her. Twiggy, as I recall, Twiggy was watching this show called Opportunity Knocks, which was kind of like any star talent show. If you got through to the next round, you came back next week and so on. And Mary Hopkin was singing a Joan Baez song, There But For Fortune, and had such a
Great
beautiful voice.
song.
Great song. Twiggy called Paul, they're good friends still are, and Paul called me. We all watched it. We all went down to Wales and signed her up. And that led to Those Were the Days, which of course was an incredible song. And
Who wrote Those Are the Days?
exactly, very good question. Paul had been to a nightclub called the Blue Angel some weeks or I think months previously, where a duo called Gene and Francesca, I think, an American duo, had sung Those Were the Days. And he had made a mental note of it, obviously. Because when he signed Mary Hopkin, he knew what record he was going to make with her, and he knew that it was going to be a huge hit. And it turned out, we credited them with the song. Turned out it's actually a Russian folk song. That whole da-da-da-da-da-da is as Russian as it sounds.
Yeah.
So Paul said, we need to find that song, which we did. And he knew I wanted to do it. And he wanted the instrument, the cymbalom. A cymbalom it's you hear it in movie music quite a lot. It's like a big hammer dulcimer. It's like a hammer dulcimer, but then it looks like a zither where the strings cross over with each other. And you play it with hammers like a dulcimer. So on Those Were the Days, that dring, 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 that plays the solo in the intro is the cymbalom. I had to find the best cymbalom player in London, which I did for Paul. Because in this instance, head of A&R meant help Paul make the record, which is fine with me. We did it at EMI.
Which we think of as Abbey Road.
Which you think of as Abbey Road, because eventually somebody very cleverly changed the name to make it worth more money. That was when they were in the process of selling it. Yeah, and I suggested the arranger because what happened was, and this is a whole other story, but...
Tell it.
When I was doing the James album, as I said, I added different instruments on it, and they're quite decorated with string quartet and brass quartet and this, that, and the other. And I wanted it to not sound too necessarily pop. So a friend of mine called Richard Houston, I had played in a jazz group with me. He was a trumpet player, guitar player, but I knew also that he was a classical musician. So I asked him to write all the charts for that, which he did. So that was how he came to be involved with Apple. So when Paul wanted strings and everything on Those Were the Days, I said, well, you met Richard, who did the stuff on the James album. He went, oh, great, he'll do. So he wrote the arrangement on Those Were the Days and became kind of the in-house Apple arranger guy, which of course is how he ended up unknowingly writing the Long and Winding Road arrangement that Paul hated only because he didn't want it to be there.
Wow.
But obviously if you get a call from somebody saying, Phil Spector wants you to write an arranger, it's for the Beatles Long Range, you go, yes.
Of course.
You don't go, do the Beatles know this is going on? Yeah. The answer was one of them didn't, But it's a beautiful arrangement. I still like the one without it, but better. But that's a whole other story.
I think I like it better with it just because I grew up with it.
And exactly.
That's how the song goes to me.
And it's good. It's really good. Richard's terrific.
How many employees were there at Apple?
Don't know. There were Apple Publishing, Apple Films, Apple, and obviously Apple Records. But
would you say it was like in the neighborhood of 20 people or like 50 people?
I would say it was in between those two numbers.
I see.
Would be my guess, yes. Because there were quite a few sort of assistants and secretaries and the guy on the door and, so it might be a size 50.
And the office was in that whole building?
Well, we started off in Wigmore Street, I think. No, we started off in Baker Street. I can't remember why we kept moving, but then we moved to Wigmore Street, and then finally they bought this building. I think they bought it, and God knows they shouldn't have sold it, but I can't imagine what it's worth now. It was such a great building. I was on the top floor. It was fun.
Do you remember what was on the other floors?
Yes, some of them. I mean, ground floor was the entranceway, and I think Peter Brown's office / kind of General Beatles' office might have been on the ground floor.
What did
might have
Peter
been
Brown
up
do?
one, on what we would call the first floor.
What did he do?
Peter Brown was general sort of assistant, kind of sort of manager with Neil Aspinall. And when Brian died. He'd always been their sort of right-hand man, sort of ambassador, And it's funny because he's legend now because his name shows up in the song about Peter Brown called to say you can get married and whatever, which was Peter Brown arranging John and Yoko's wedding. And so his name shows up in the song, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's the Peter Brown."
LMNT, LMNT Electrolytes. Have you ever felt dehydrated after an intense workout or a long day in the sun? Do you want to maximize your endurance and feel your best? Add LMNT Electrolytes to your daily routine. Perform better and sleep deeper. Improve your cognitive function. Experience an increase in steady energy with fewer headaches and fewer muscle cramps. LMNT Electrolytes. Drink it in the sauna. Refreshing flavors include grapefruit, citrus, watermelon, and chocolate salt. Formulated with the perfect balance of sodium, potassium, and magnesium to keep you hydrated and energized throughout the day. These minerals help conduct the electricity that powers your nervous system so you can perform at your very best. LMNT Electrolytes are sugar-free, keto-friendly, and great tasting. Minerals are the stuff of life. So visit drinklmnt.com/tetra and stay salty with LMNT Electrolytes. LMNT.
You also mentioned the name of the show that Mary Hopkins was seen on, and I never knew that that was the name of a TV show, but there's an outtake of John Lennon saying that name in the studio.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Oh,
and I always
right.
just thought it was a clever line,
No,
but he's referring to a TV show.
It was yes, the Opportunity Knocks was the big TV show. So that's where if the Beatles hadn't got a record deal, eventually maybe they would have ended up on Opportunity Knocks. I don't know.
Opportunity Knocks. And it's the was there a studio in the basement?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not when we moved in. There was or was not, depending on how much you judge a studio by whether it works or not. In the basement later on. So the basement, ground floor admission. I think Beatles' office, maybe up one flight of stairs, which is sort of the big office, which Neil had an office just off of, I think. And that was sort of the kind of conference room, or wherever Beatles were there.
If the band came in, that's where they would go.
They went. Yeah.
I see.
And then the next floor up was Derek Taylor's office, which is where the fun was, which is where everything was kind of happening.
And that was the publicity press?
Yes, he was pressed. I don't know how much you know about Derek Taylor, but
Not much. Tell me.
he was brilliant. I mean, amazing, fantastic, interesting man. Worth reading his book. It's called As Time Goes By. And he's a wonderful writer, so it's gripping read. And there's some chapters where you go, this is all weird. And you finish reading the chapter and find out, he was on acid the whole time. That's why the chapter is. But he still wrote beautifully.
Yes.
He was a truly exceptional man. The Beatles loved him dearly, as did I.
How did he come into the Beatles world? Do you know? Did
I guess he
Brian
worked
find
for
him?
Brian early, and then he went to America and had a PR sort of company, but not like any other PR company. He was much cooler than anybody else. And he worked for the Byrds, I think, and some other people, and then was asked to come back for Apple.
And was the Beatles Brian's first act? Because
Yes.
he owned record stores before
Yes.
this.
Yes. As far as I know, I don't think he had any ambitions to be a manager any more than I did when he heard the Beatles and just went, this is too good to ignore. I mean, he was only in the music business in the sense that he ran a record shop.
Yes.
And I think Peter Brown may have worked in the shop with him. Maybe that's how Peter came on board. I think he knew Brian.
Tell me more about Derek and Derek's office.
Well, Derek's office was the office where the bar was, for example. And Derek's top drawer hid all kinds of wonders as well. So everyone would end up in there. So when my office was on the very top floor, next to these people who worked for me listening to tapes. And I think Apple Publishing was a guy called Mike O'Connor, who ran Apple Publishing, might have been on the next floor down. There were about 5 floors, I think, in a basement. But yeah, Derek's office was where you went later in the day, to see what was going on and have a drink or a smoke or whatever was going. And so when the Hells Angels all arrived or Ken Kesey arrived, or, and no one knew what to do with him. So put him in Derek's office. Derek will know what to do. And he did, Derek was brilliant. Derek was also responsible for the close relationship with Harry Nilsson. He was a huge Nilsson fan. He produced the
I didn't know
record
that.
with Harry Nilsson. And Harry and the Beatles, of course, became very close.
And would you say everybody in the office is around 25 years old or less?
I suppose so, yes. I
So
think
it's a young,
Yeah.
again, we think back and it's this business, and I just want to really
Well,
picture
Ron
what it's
Cass,
like.
it's interesting because we thought we needed a real record guy to run the label. And we hired this guy, Ron Cass, who was head of Liberty Records, had been head of Liberty. We also knew he was cool because he was married to Joan Collins. And how could you not be cool if you were married
And I
to
think
Joan?
Lenny Waronker's dad owned Liberty Records.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
So Ron Cass might have been a little bit older, I think. That's how I got to produce him.
He was like the adult,
He was the adult, yes, exactly.
but everyone else was kids.
I think so.
It's cool.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, there were lawyers and accountants and stuff who were there to be grown-ups, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was exciting. And yeah, Derek, there's all kinds of Derek adventures you should read up on. There's the trip we all took to record the Black Dyke Mills Band. You know about them?
I don't know about them.
If you do get Derek's book,
Yeah.
read that chapter if you
Okay.
read nothing else, because it's
I'll read the whole thing. It sounds great.
It's fantastic. The Black Dyke Mills Band, Paul was invited to write a theme tune for a show called Thingamabob, a television show called Thingamabob. And he wrote this melody, which was really good and catchy. And he decided he wanted it done by a brass band. Brass bands are quite a big thing in England. It's a very traditional English business. All the factories up north used to have their own brass band, and they had brass band competitions and all that stuff. All just, trumpets and euphoniums, and some of those instruments that only show up in marching bands and brass bands. So he wanted it done by a brass band, so we found the best brass band who'd won the competition that last year, called the Black Dyke Mills Band, which was their factory. And they were terrific, and we had the arrangement written out for them. But we did the recording up near where they all were, up in Yorkshire. So we drove up and did the recording and stuff. And it was on the ride back that we had all kinds of these adventures. We stopped in some town. There's a whole bit in it where Paul says he gave me the map to choose the village. He couldn't decide where we were going to look for to have lunch on the way, or dinner or whatever on the way back. So I picked a town called Harold because I liked it. It was an unusual name for a town. It has 2 R's. So we stopped in Harold, and we were in this huge Rolls Daimler or something. And so it was a matter of seconds before the entire town of Harold knew who had just arrived, because we'd stopped and talked to one guy who was trimming his hedge, and we were looking for somewhere to eat. And then he ended up inviting us all in, and his wife made us food, and it's a whole adventure. We ended up back in the pub. Paul ended up on the piano. There's all these people still. If you look it all up, there's people still reminiscing about when I was a kid.
Fantastic.
Paul McCartney stopped in our town and sat in the pub and played us a bunch of new songs, including "Hey Jude," by the way, which he'd just written.
Wow.
And you can see kids would go, no, but it's in black and white and it's all true. And so on. So that and then but Derek says that's an example of one of the ones where Derek says Paul gave the book to Peter Asher. Peter Asher looked at it for what seemed like 3 hours, but it was probably 30 seconds.
Yeah. Amazing.
Oh, okay, that's right. I remember that now.
How many years was that Apple experiment? How long were you guys in that building?
I don't know. I'm very bad at dates and
But
times.
guessing. Just give me a feeling.
2 years, maybe?
Yeah, so short. It was
Yeah,
a short.
Short.
It went bad quickly.
Yes, there were big rows going on. And it was mostly about Alan. I mean, yes,
Did
the Yoko thing was a contributory factor.
Did having Apple add to the pressure of the Beatles? Like had the Apple idea not happened and had the Beatles just been the Beatles, would there have been more of a chance that they would have found a way
I think
to
if the Apple idea had happened, but Brian hadn't died,
Yeah.
the Apple thing wouldn't have made that much difference. But I think because Brian died, and
was the glue.
Then there's a whole, and there's nobody to go, let's think about how to make this make more sense. And
I see.
the accountants are telling us it's out of control. because that was all. It was all those discussions that led to John going, "We need somebody to be in charge of all this. I know the right guy." And Paul said, "No, you don't. I know about that guy. He's a crook." Whatever the conversation was, because I knew he was a crook. I was already warned off him by people.
And I
who worked.
believe John was too. Like, wasn't he warned off on him by the
Yes.
Rolling Stones? And
Yes, I think so. And which you think would be enough. But Alan was very clever. Alan's whole line was, everyone's going to tell you not to do business with me. That's because they're all scared of me. They're going to say that, I'm a complete cunt and, and I am. That may be
Yeah,
true.
but I'm on your
but
side.
I'm yours, And that's what you need. And John liked that. You can see John going for the idea that someone who's really tough and unpleasant is going to be beneficial to them, which is, maybe there's some truth to it. But he also was a bit crooked and would sign stuff that he wasn't supposed to be signing and transfer things that he wasn't supposed to transfer and be a creep, And so having a creep on your side is risky, because he's still a creep.
did you ever get to meet Alan?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about that.
I met him, and I'd heard about him already from some friends who worked for the Rolling Stones. And
How long did
we
he
didn't
work?
talk about much. James had a meeting with him.
How long did he work with the Stones? Do you know?
No, I don't. I know that he had Sam Cooke already when he was doing, which also, of course, would impress the Stones.
Yeah, of course.
He had Sam Cooke's publishing.
Yeah. So what was the feeling when you met him?
He was out to impress. He wanted to be the tough guy, and it was clear that he was, that I expected him to fire everybody. I quit. I'm one of the people who didn't get fired because once I decided to leave, I wrote a letter of resignation, which is the only thing I haven't found. It must be somewhere in the Apple vaults because they've kept a lot of stuff. I'd be curious to see whether I gave any reasons for resigning. But I definitely left, and of course, he did fire everybody, and it carried on for a very short length of time. And John, as you know, admires that kind of toughness. He just kind of went, oh, he's going to show them. And he did, but he showed everybody, including the Beatles. That's the problem.
So before this, we were talking about coming to California and how different it was. And what was the music scene like here versus there?
Trying to remember who I went to see. I saw the Doors once, the Whiskey, who I liked the keyboard player. I wasn't sure about the band. Well, Linda Ronstadt actually says, she said, the band's great, the singer's no good.
How'd you meet Linda?
I was in New York, and I can't remember still who it was who said, there's a girl playing at the bitter end who you should go and see. She's completely amazing. She's an extraordinary singer, got an amazing voice, and she's ridiculously hot. And so I went, okay. And I went to see her, and it was all true.
Was she still in the band? What were they called?
No.
The Ponies?
This was
Stone Ponies?
her solo, after the Stone Ponies.
Yeah.
And she'd had one hit single on her own that long, long time. And I went and I talked to her then. I met her then. And it got a little bit complicated because John Boylan, who might have been her boyfriend at the time, although then might have been also J.D. Souther. But anyway, John Boylan had helped to put this band together, which consisted of Don Henley and Glenn Frey. And John David had helped with that too. And that was the band I saw her with, I think. And everyone, it was great. She sang amazingly. Silver Threads and Golden Needles was the song that I remember specifically. And at the time, there was talk of me. I was initially came in. Linda asked if I would help her finish, sort out the album she was in the middle of, which was a solo album called Don't Cry Now, some of which had been produced by John Boylan, some by John David Souther. And it was all in a bit of a muddle. And so I did that because I loved her voice and was happy to do it. And I forget 2 or 3 tracks on that album are officially credited to me. And in the meantime, we did have a discussion about management because John had recommended that I might be a candidate. But actually at the time I'd said no because I was managing Kate Taylor at the time, who'd made an album who I really believed in and loved, and I still do. But Kate Taylor then retired. She decided the road was not for her. And the album stayed out and did reasonably okay. We made an album for Atlantic. Ahmed Ertegun was a big fan of hers. And she actually called Linda and said, by the way, I'm not working anymore. So, you should talk to Peter again because he loved you. And I think Linda called me because Kate told her to, as I recall. And Linda told me that story. But anyway, so we decided that yes, I would be a manager. And so that's when the relationship began. And then the next album was the one I produced from scratch. And that was Heart Like a Wheel, where everything changed.
Was her voice just astounding, right from
Astounding.
you just couldn't believe it?
Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
And then
She's one of the great singers.
she's one of the great singers.
Yeah.
Her if you haven't seen the documentary about Linda,
I've seen it. I love it.
it's so great. And that's when you discover, as you do when you watch the documentary, boy, she's so smart and so well-read and so articulate and extraordinary. And I freely admit the prejudice at the time, I was probably guilty of, same as everyone else. You think, if someone's that good and that incredibly good-looking and attractive, they couldn't also be brilliant.
Yeah, it's too much.
It's too much.
Yeah.
And I ran into that, of course, the very traditional way that people would assume that I was the one choosing the songs, I was the one in charge of everything, whereas in fact, every decision I made, every song I chose, was in conjunction with Linda. And in terms of choosing songs, it's probably 70-30 her.
Yeah.
In terms of production, it's definitely 50-50,
But that's good production. It's
course.
like whatever's necessary.
Exactly.
It's like
And Linda had great
being the
ideas.
boss isn't
No.
the job.
No.
It's the best result.
Exactly so. Exactly. And Linda freely admits that she's not a producer. I mean, she's done it well for some other people, but she gets distracted easily, but once we would decide the mission, and then I would execute it, but she's musically, of course, so brilliant. And the fact that she could turn her genius to so many different musical genres, that she would do, the rock and roll and the traditional standards and the Mexican rancheras and beautiful ballads, and nail all of them and put so much work into it.
Yeah.
And suddenly decide she
Kept
wants to
it
sing
very
opera.
interesting too. Like it was very interesting seeing all the changes she went through.
Yeah.
Because the instrument of her voice is so spectacular.
Yes.
And then to put on a whole new
To teach it opera, right?
Yeah.
Teach that voice how to sing opera, And she worked, I mean, even the film doesn't quite capture how hard she worked. She would have vocal coaching every day and listen to every version of La Boheme when she was doing that in New York and so on. So she could, explain.
amazing too to have such a natural talent and still the work ethic
Yep.
to do even better, or learn something new.
Exactly. And her talent is so specific in the sense that it's singing.
Yeah.
Full stop. She can barely be persuaded to move when she's singing a song. By today's standards, where everyone has to be able to dance and leap around, she does none of that. And she likes the idea of production is appealing to her. When we did the Nelson Riddle stuff, and she got to put on those great clothes and fancy hairdos and all that, she liked that. But generally, directors would always go, okay, on this bit, walk across or come down the steps. And she'd go, no, I'm busy. I'm up here. I'm singing.
How many albums did you get to do with her?
Gosh, I suppose about 5 rock and roll
great,
ones,
great.
and then 3 Nelson ones,
Great.
2 mariachi ones.
Great. I love the mariachi ones.
Yeah,
So good.
Sings the shit out of that stuff.
So good.
So brilliant.
Y a las 11 de la noche me aprendió la poesía. Y a las 11 de la noche me aprendió la poesía.
I did those with this guy Ruben Fuentes, who is the sort of Nelson Riddle of mariachi, who was amazing, and these great musicians.
Great idea.
My respect.
Great idea.
Completely. And of course, people would go, why are you diverging into all this other kinds of music? She went, no, I'm not diverging. I'm being retroactive, because they were literally the songs she grew up listening to on her father's knee.
Yeah.
They were her father's songs, and that's how she learned them. And the weird part is, of course, the political aspect is that, and sociological aspect, that back in America in the 50s, you were instructed, forced to not speak Spanish in front of your children. You were told it's really bad. You're being a bad mother if you speak Spanish in front of your children. They must only learn English to be proper Americans, which is completely insane. I mean, now everyone realizes, of course, you speak Spanish at home, English at school, you translate for your granny. That's the way immigration works perfectly. Instead of which, she'd learned all these songs. So we'd run into situations when we took the show on the road where she's up there singing, in perfect a Mexican Spanish accent is apparently perfect. So that she sings so brilliant, people would come up at the end of the show and start talking fast in Spanish. And she'd have to go, I'm really sorry, I only sing it, which just seems so weird until you understand this
How
business.
she learned it.
When
Yeah.
Linda said in the playground, if two of you started speaking Spanish to each other, you get your hands slapped.
Wow.
Physically slapped.
Wow.
Because it was like, that's un-American.
Yeah.
And no, it's not. That's extremely American. that's the point of America.
Amazing.
But even now, as you know, there's people who don't get it,
Yeah. Tell me, how did you come across Tony Joe White?
I was a huge fan.
Yeah.
I loved Polk Silent Annie. I don't remember who suggested that maybe I should do a record with him. It might have been the label. And I met him, loved him.
What a cool artist.
He was
There's
wonderful.
nobody else like that.
I know.
Very one of a kind.
And a great songwriter. People forget he wrote, was it Rainy Night in Georgia as well?
I didn't know he wrote that.
Yeah.
I love that song.
Exactly. One of the things I was excited about with Tony Joe, of course, is I got to use some, them musicians down there.
Where did you record?
Maybe Ardent and Mike Utley played bass. I can't remember who the rest of the band was.
Were the band incredible?
Incredible.
Yeah.
They were great. And I knew, I'd met Mike before because Gordon and I, many years earlier, when we were on the road, when we got to Memphis, we'd made a big point saying, can we go to the Stax studios? Would they let us in? And our minders, the promotions guys from Capitol, kind of going, no, we don't go there, It's not the bad part of town or whatever. And we said, no, please, it's, that's all we want to see in Memphis. And they finally agreed to make the call. And they made the call, and they didn't know who we were, and they said, great, come over. It was a fantastic day. We sat in the studio. We met Steve Cropper, who remains a friend.
Incredible.
Mike Utley, the bass player, Al Jackson, the drummer, and Booker T, of course. And they were all kind of coming in and out. And then they played us some tracks. What I didn't realize is they would have some tracks where they just weren't sure whether it was this might be Rufus, it might be Carla, it might be Otis, They hadn't necessarily decided who was who, but they played just these incredible grooves and stuff, which is probably how Green Onions and all the actual Booker T stuff happened. And we were so impressed. And Jim Stewart, of course, who was the genius behind the whole thing, and who was the white guy along Steve Cropper. And they'd established themselves in this largely black part of town, making completely black music. And it's such there must be a Stax documentary there if there's, I haven't seen it. But
I don't know if there is. I've never seen one.
What a story, I don't know much about Jim Stewart. Somebody said he might still be alive, but he's kind of a recluse. But, I mean, that's an amazing story that all that music came out of that group of musicians, and the number of hits they had, both for other people and for themselves, as the MGs, was pretty colossal. Anyway, so I was excited to do Tony Joe White. I still think I could have made a better record. I remember doing things that I don't think I should have done. Like I may have not spent enough time listening to the way they wanted to do it. Because my instinct at the time was, mono drums? I don't think so. Let's move on. So I was kind of going, no, I'd rather have the drums spread out like I'm used to, whatever. But I should have done it. And well, look, they made a whole bunch of set records that were so great that, I should have started off saying, just make me a Stax record and then I'll interfere if needed,
Welcome to the House of Macadamias. Macadamias are a delicious superfood, sustainably sourced directly from farmers. Macadamias, a rare source of omega-7, linked to collagen regeneration, enhanced weight management, and better fat metabolism. Macadamias, heart-healthy and brain-boosting fats. Macadamias, paleo-friendly. keto and plant-based. Macadamias. No wheat, no dairy, no gluten, no GMOs. No preservatives, no palm oil, no added sugar. House of Macadamias. Rye roasted with Namibian sea salt, cracked black pepper, and chocolate dipped. Snack bars come in chocolate, coconut white chocolate, and blueberry white chocolate. Visit houseofmacadamias.com/tetra.
Did you ever see the Hail Hail Rock and Roll movie?
Yeah, I was there, of course.
I had no idea.
I was there because Linda's in it. And you know, the one Taylor Hackford did.
Yeah.
That's how I got to know Taylor Hackford, who was a friend. And yes, I was there managing Linda because she had, to be fair, had made it clear from the beginning that she wouldn't stay for the second show if it was like after midnight, because she was quite firm on such things. And she said, I promise I'll get it right first time. And, you know, so not that you can tell from the performance, but they only had one take to work from. They had the evening one. And then, of course, Chuck, as you probably know, pulled a similar thing, different grounds.
Yeah.
But he went in and said, it's after midnight, second show is another day, double my fee.
Yeah.
And then it kept going. But Chuck, you know, all these people are doing for nothing. Taylor Hackford,
Yeah.
Keith Richards being the band leader of you know,
Yeah.
and take conscientious. Keith was doing great, you know.
Yeah.
He was really being a band leader.
Yeah.
And wearing the jacket and the whole thing.
Yeah.
But Chuck went, that's very nice of them, you know. And they paid him. But in the end, but yes, it's a great movie.
I remember when I first saw it, I remember thinking, wow, Chuck is just a jerk. And
Yeah.
Keith is right about everything.
Yes.
And then I saw it probably 20 years later. And it's the same story you just told. I'm watching, it's like, oh, Keith Richards is telling Chuck Berry how to be Chuck Berry.
Yes.
This is not right.
Right.
It's like I had it only came, the wisdom comes with time and experience.
Yes.
But when we're younger, we think we know the right way.
Yes,
And then over
exactly.
time, we learn, oh, there's a lot of ways to do this. And
Yeah.
trust the masters.
Yes, exactly. And clearly the only instruction Chuck needs is be Chuck, you know.
That's it.
It's just like I saw him rehearse. Might have been the Red Rock show. It was something else. And of course, it was a local band
Yeah.
who were backing him up.
Yeah.
And on one occasion, because it happened 2 or 3 times, he walked on stage, talked to the guy, said, you know Maybelline? I went, yeah. He said, you know my show. Left. And because every song starts the same, every song's mostly in the same key. So, you know, the band, you still don't know what song, you start without knowing what song it is. And just figure it will make itself clear, and it does.
Amazing.
And it's sloppy, but it works.
Yeah, yeah. I think to some degree Dylan does a similar thing where he'll just start playing songs, maybe even in a
Yes.
different key.
And Dylan, you may never find out what song
Yeah,
it is.
no, but Tom Petty would talk about when they were the band for Dylan, you just had to try to figure out what was happening. You never knew. You never knew. It was nothing was planned, and he would start a song in a different rhythm in a different key, and you just have to listen for some clue.
Something
and usually
vaguely familiar.
someone in the band would everybody would be looking at each other, and one guy in the band would say what it was, you know, and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's really funny. It makes sense. Yeah.
Tell me about being an artist on Capitol Records, your first trip to the Capitol Records building.
It was exciting. But
I'll bet.
the first time we came into New York, of course, was America was New York.
I see.
So, you know, we were thrilled. Capitol sent us, you know, a proper limo, whatever year that would have been, a 64 Cadillac limo to pick us up, you know. So
Was 64 the first year you came? That's
Yes.
when the first hit was.
Yes.
Amazing.
First hit, 64. We played the World's Fair. We played at the Globy thing.
Incredible.
Hemisphere? Unisphere.
Chemisphere, I think it's
Hem-
called.
hem-
Hemisphere?
Unisphere.
I can't remember the
I
name.
think it's the Unisphere.
We used to picture that in the gatefold of the Beastie Boys, that first Beastie Boys album.
Oh, right.
We did a photo session there.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
did it still have water in the moat?
No.
Because when we played there, it's got this sort of not very deep sort of little canal around it, which was filled with water. And it was just the police at that time, it happened to the Beatles all the time. The police would go, no, there's nothing to worry about. We can handle it. You know, it's just a bunch of girls and don't worry. And would be wrong. You know, would be completely wrong. They'd be overwhelmed in like 10 seconds. And I remember saying, "Oh, that's cool. There's a moat." And the police went, "Yeah, the girls won't come across that." And of course, as soon as we went out there, the girls jump in the moat and swim across. It's like an early wet T-shirt contest. Amazing. It was brilliant. And we were kind of going, "This is so cool." And these soaking wet girls coming out and hugging us. And it was great. I mean, that mania thing was bizarre. The strangest thing I ever saw, and I've told the story before, but, we play a lot of places where the police would say, "Don't worry," and then instant you come out, which we were part of only in the sense that the Beatles were, again, leading the way, but especially when they'd seen Hard Day's Night, the girls knew how they were supposed to behave.
Yeah.
They were supposed to scream and go crazy and rush us, us collectively.
Yes.
And they did. And the weirdest one was we were playing out of doors in like one corner of a baseball thing or something. Mm-hmm. And at that time, those outdoor stages often used to be just a couple of trucks pulled up next to each other, truck beds. And so as soon as we came out, the girls jump off down from the baseball seats and running across the diamond, which they're probably all freaking out about their bloody baseball thing anyway. So they're all running, and the police said, "Go, go." So we jumped off, and we're running to some car or whatever. And I looked back, my glasses fell off on the grass. So I leapt down, picked up my glasses, and ran on. And the girls were jumping down, and I saw some girl find the place where my glasses had fallen, pull the grass up and eat it. And I went, "That is so cool."
That's commitment.
That's commitment. So she was eating the
The
grass.
power of music.
Yes, exactly. And of the Beatles, particularly. Because
Unbelievable.
the whole British invasion madness was Beatle related.
So was Beatlemania as wild before the movie, or did the movie?
I think the movie showed people their moves.
Yeah.
Yes.
So before it might have been screaming,
they never
but
knew what to do.
It would have been screaming, but in their seats.
I think so. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I exactly. And if they did catch you there, nobody knew what to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there'd be occasions when four girls would actually make it and sort of catch you, and they'd kind of stop screaming and kind of go, "No, what do we do?" Like, what happens? Because they were all 14.
This is a good question. This is related to something Mick Jagger said a long time ago. So, because the Stones are from London, and he said in the early days they didn't take the Beatles so seriously because of where they were from. He's like,
Liverpool. Right?
It's like nothing good comes from Liverpool.
Exactly.
Tell me about that. Is that a real like?
Oh yes. I mean, I don't think we thought less of them, but the weird part
Would it
for
be
us,
like, what would be the U.S. equivalent? Like, where would that be?
I suppose, I don't know, is it Pittsburgh? Something
like just the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, I think so. And, so we didn't realize that until we get to America, and people would go, "What's Liverpool really like?" And I go, "Hardly ever been there. We've done a couple of gigs there, but I don't know." And everyone we knew from Liverpool, the minute they made any money, the first thing they bought was a train ticket to London. That's where you wanted to go. That's where it was going to happen. So the fact that there would be a Liverpool scene, which there was, I guess. I mean, there was the Cavern and some other places, and but we were puzzled and surprised by the respect and adulation that was bestowed upon Liverpool. We were going, "Liverpool?" And they'd go, "What's it like?" And we go, "I don't know. It's kind of a grim port town, And
Did the Beatles have a different, or the people from Liverpool have a different accent than the people in London?
Oh, yes.
You could tell where they were from?
Yes, absolutely.
Or just a northern accent?
No, it's you can tell Liverpool.
Yeah.
Some of those accents are quite specific. I mean, when in Liverpool compared to Newcastle, which is Geordie, or let alone compared to Scottish, but there's other towns with their own accents, and Liverpool is very distinctive.
Did you ever get to see the Animals play?
Yes.
Tell me about
that. And I can't remember where it was, but I saw them. They were terrific. Thought Eric was great. Thought Alan Price was great.
And Eric's another one. Just the voice is just so cool.
Yeah, he's
different than everybody else.
He's a really nice guy. And Eric and I.
They're from Newcastle, is that right?
Yes, they are Geordies, which means you're from Newcastle. Eric and I ended up in New York together at the same time. We went to see Sam Cooke at the Apollo.
How was that?
It was amazing, unbelievable. He was great. And Billy Stewart, who was great. Yeah, but, and of course everyone told us don't go, you know. And we would, you know, although you can't go to Harlem, you know, and we kind of went, yeah, we can. We're English. It's different. And we found a taxi that would take us and went to the Apollo. Just went there and bought a ticket and went in. And it's interesting. Sam Cooke was completely fantastic. Although it's interesting, because I asked Chris Blackwell once, of all those performers who were so legendary, you know, who was the best in his eyes, and it was Jackie Wilson.
Wow.
He said that, you know, yes, James Brown, yes, Sam Cooke, but Jackie Wilson was just so riveting with the microphone stuff and the great singing and everything. I never saw him live, but I always thought that was interesting.
Yeah. I got to see James Brown several times, and
Oh,
it was
yeah.
always unbelievable.
Yeah, see, him I saw in America and in England.
Mm.
You know, I found some pictures the other day of me in the audience at Ready Steady Go, because it was James Brown was on Ready Steady Go.
Wow.
And it was me and somebody, Barry Miles, the writer. We were in the audience, and I'd completely forgotten. What I
How
saw the
radical
picture.
did James Brown seem when you were in London? What was that like?
We were in awe. You know, again, it was just part of this overall miracle of American music. We just couldn't believe what these people could do.
Who else we talk about? You got to work with Elton at one point?
Yes, I've been a fan of Elton's for ages. I went to the famous Troubadour show.
Really?
Yeah.
How was it?
It was great.
Yeah.
It was amazing because I knew about him, and I think we'd already met. But somehow he ended up coming over to our house, the same one, Longwood Avenue, I was still in. He came over the next day, and that's when he met James Taylor. James was staying with me, and Elton came over with the band.
Had he made his first album yet or no?
Yes. Yeah, this was when, yes, he was promoting that
First
album when
album.
he did that Troubadour show. Yeah, and it was a legendary place. You know, we had James in there. And, you know,
And Linda famously played there.
yeah, Linda played there a bunch. And the bar was where everybody hung out and swapped songs and all that stuff. And that's where James and I heard You've Got a Friend for the first time. Because Carole, you know, what happened was after I'd asked Carole to be in the band for the album, I then asked her if she would come on the road for some of those dates. Because up till now, James had only played the Troubadour folk style completely by himself. But I wanted to do a week at the Troubadour now the record was out and doing well with the band, the people who played on the record. So I got Russ Kunkel and Cooch and so on. And asked Carole if she'd do it. She said yes. And it was James's idea that she should maybe do a little opening set because he knew she was about to make her own record and said, look, you know, she was terrified of being on her own. Said maybe it's a way to get your feet wet kind of thing. So would you like to do 20 minutes, half an hour, whatever you want in front of my show, just on your piano? He said, all you have to do is play the songs and tell people you wrote them because no one's going to believe it. Because she looked like a 16-year-old schoolgirl, you know. Yeah. And that's what she did. But when on the opening day of the sound check, James and I were in the little balcony at the Troubadour. We stuck around just to give Carole moral support. And in order to just make sure she could hear the piano and do her sound check, she played the song she'd just finished writing the night before, and that was You've Got a Friend. And that's when James and I kind of went, shit, you know, what was that? And James said, and still says, it's one of the best pop songs ever written.
Yeah.
And that's when he asked her if he could learn it and sing it. And so that, of course, when Sweet Baby James was already out as a hit, but Tapestry hadn't been made yet. So Carole then recorded, and Carole said, yes, you can do it, but I'm going to do it on my record as well.
Great.
So at the same time, basically, Lou was in the studio at A&M doing her album and did a version of You've Got a Friend, and we were in the studio at a place called Crystal Sound doing our version. And the only secret weapon I had was Joni Mitchell sang all the background parts.
Incredible.
And the miracle was that it worked for everybody because was James's big hit single, and on Carole's case, it was one of the key tracks on Tapestry, which sold a gazillion billion records. So
yeah, it seemed like the fact that both versions existed seemed to help each other.
I think so,
It felt
because they
like
were
that.
kind of different, and because I had, as I say, no piano.
Yeah.
It was just James and Cooch on acoustics, which was a great sound. And it actually happened again on Handyman when we did that. That was kind of an accident.
Great.
Cooch started playing the song in the studio. We were working on some other song. And Cooch just started playing Handyman very slowly. And James joined in and started playing and singing. And I went, just a minute. So we actually recorded it, just the two of them, and Russ playing a cardboard box or something, and then added the other instruments.
I got to see James and Carole play at the Troubadour together, I don't know, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, it was fun doing that because James was sort of worried about it and didn't know he wanted to record it, but I said, we have to record it.
Of course, history.
They filmed it with only like 2 cameras or something, but made it work. Yeah, we were up in the little booth thing, Nathaniel Kunkel and
I might have been in that same booth.
Probably.
Because I was up in
Probably. Yes, exactly. Right, exactly.
So we were getting to Elton John.
Yes. So yeah, I saw Elton, the original Troubadour show. And as I said, he came over to our house afterwards. And I've known him and liked him so much for a long time. We haven't worked together that much. I did some tracks on a Randy Newman album that Elton was on, where Elton played an angel. It was a brilliant album, Randy wrote a version of Faust and we did this recorded version, which was really extraordinary. James Taylor played God, Randy played the devil, Don Henley played Faust, Linda Ronstadt played the good girl, Bonnie Raitt played the bad girl, and Elton John played an English angel. It was an insane cast. I said to Randy afterwards, you're the only person in the whole world, I think, that could actually make an album with all those people on it and have it not be a hit. It's extraordinary because Randy is such a genius, one of the great geniuses of pop music. But, somehow people don't get it always.
Yeah.
And this musical is so good and the cast was so insane, but the public didn't quite catch on.
It seems like there's a line between the way Elton plays piano and the way Carole King plays piano. They both have a real soulful, almost gospel influence in their styles.
It's true. Yes, I think that's actually right. Elton's a bit more rock and roll, in the sense of the hammering right hand. But that's true.
I think the thing
They're
that
certainly mutual fans.
The thing that I like about both of their music, I feel like there's some line that works. They both have that thing, and it's not a thing that most piano players have.
I think you're right. And they're also both not jazzy,
Yeah.
And I mean, God knows I love jazz piano. You can't beat Bill Evans. But they have very little of that in their playing. It tends to be simple and not full of like little extra jazzy notes or jazzy noodles at any point. And I think they have that in common. And they both are brilliant accompanists, to themselves. They both play exactly the right part to fit their singing.
Yeah. And I guess both wrote the music for other people's lyrics.
That's right. I guess, I don't actually know for a fact. Did Jerry Goffin write the lyrics first?
I don't know if he wrote them first.
I don't know, but he certainly...
I don't know, but he certainly wrote the lyrics and she wrote the music.
Because what's so unusual about Elton, of course, is that it's absolutely lyrics first.
Yeah.
That he can take, a piece of paper that just arrived from Bernie Taupin, stick it up on the and you'd swear he was looking at music. You'd swear he was looking at a piece of music because
amazing.
He just plays it. And he's written with other people brilliantly, of course, too, Tim Rice and others. But there's something magic about him and Bernie where it's as if Elton knows the song as soon as he sees the lyrics.
Tell me about. I never got to meet Diana Ross, but I know you got to work with her. Tell me about her.
It was amazing. I was nervous because you hear these stories, they call me Miss Ross and all that stuff. And my impression, first of all, she's charming. I'd met her years before. I'd met her for the first time when Peter and Gordon were on Hullabaloo.
Wow.
And the Supremes were on. To get to meet them was, an immense thrill because, we bought every record that came out on Motown, and they were so charming and so beautiful and so extraordinary. So that was exciting. And then when Diana and I worked together, I was, as I said, a little bit nervous because of the stories one had heard, but she was helpful and charming I had no issues or problems at all, far from it. The opposite, in fact. I remember the engineer and I at one point were sitting down, sorting out a vocal or doing something on the board, and we felt her stand up behind us. She'd been sitting in the back of the room, and we would kind of go, oh, this is it, here we go. And she said, you guys have been at this for a while. Can I get you some coffee or something? We went, oh my God. That was memorable. But even more memorable was the very beginning of the session, because I think I'd cut the track without her, as far as I can remember. But anyway, first time she goes out on mic, and we're sitting in the control room, and she starts singing on the mic. The only reaction is, holy shit, it sounds exactly like Diana Ross.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That super distinct voice that sang, Stop in the Name of Love and stuff, which you know so well. She's right there. It's, and I could hardly contain myself,
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing where you don't know whether to communicate any of that to the artist, whether it's just too silly. But, you don't say, I couldn't believe it, but you do say something,
Yeah, it's
So
almost
exciting.
like when you get to work with the people who you've spent so much time listening to, it's hard to believe it's happening.
Right.
It's hard
Exactly.
to believe it's actually happening.
Right, exactly.
It's like
Well,
they walk the earth.
That's why you and I are both so extraordinarily lucky by
Yeah.
whatever set of circumstances.
I remember the first time I got to see Paul McCartney play live was in stadium, it was 80,000 people, something like that. I'm somewhere in the middle of 80,000 people, nosebleed area. And he starts singing, and I just start crying. It's like,
right, exactly.
it's like, that person wrote these songs I've been hearing my whole life.
Yep.
He walks the earth.
Yes.
It's unbelievable.
Well, that's why, I do feel bad for Paul because, yes, being famous can be annoying on many levels, I suppose. But I've personally seen Paul deal with the situation where he's introduced to somebody or meets someone and they cannot speak.
Yeah.
Literally
It's too
cannot
much.
speak.
It's too much.
And he ends up going, it's okay, or they cry.
Yeah.
They can't speak and they cry. And that would be disconcerting.
Yeah.
When that's a given risk of anyone you're meeting, that they may not speak and they may cry.
Yeah.
I think that must be
I
a
guess
bit
he
annoying,
must
a bit
be
weird.
must be used to it by now.
Exactly. I know. You obviously figure out a policy, And I've seen him pat people on the shoulder and go,
Yeah.
it's okay, But it's sort of odd. And there's very few people in that situation.
Yeah.
Maybe Mick, I don't know. But Paul is a one-off case, that you actually...
It's unbelievable.
And Ringo. But Ringo,
Yeah.
there's something more lighthearted about it. And,
Yes.
And everyone's admiration is massive. Everyone loves him because he's still the cute one, the one everyone loves,
Yeah.
But it's not quite the same thing. But as you say with Paul, there's that realization that legend occasionally is reality.
Yeah.
He's a real person.
Incredible
He's standing here.
how important every member of that band was.
Yeah.
It just fit perfectly.
I've always said it's just
perfect.
It's just like it was a Spice Girls thing where someone had put them together, only much better, and nobody did.
Yeah.
God did, if there's
Yes.
such a thing. Fate put them together.
Yes.
And
I've said that too. It's like the Beatles are proof of the existence of God. It's like it's too much.
yes, exactly.
It's too much to be that good.
Exactly.
And to be that much better than everybody.
Yeah.
No there's no
Right.
metric for it.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right. Yes.
What did you get to work on with Cher?
Some great songs. Heart of Stone, I did. After All, that duet with Peter Cetera that was a big hit for a movie. The movie sucked, but the record was good. But she's great. I mean, she's working with her is extraordinary. She's so hardworking. I remember we were working on that version of It's in His Kiss that I did with her for Mermaids, which ended up being a hit everywhere except America for some bizarre reason. And, she was great. She'd done her homework, knew the song, everything. And she at that time, she used to like the track completely done as much as possible, So everything was finished. And there's that first moment when you play it and you go, oh, I hope this is okay. But it was. And so she went out there and sang it, did like 4 takes or something. And I said, I think we have it. That was all great. Let me piece it together, give me a few minutes or come back, whatever you want. She said, no, wait. And she goes out, and in the lounge, there's like the guy designing the perfume bottle, the costume fitting for the next movie, the guy writing a book about her or something, and and you can suddenly realize I am a mere aspect of the miracle that is Cher, because she'll become really successful as a movie star and then go, now I want to make another record. And everyone goes, no, that won't work. So she does. So she wins a Grammy. So she has a #1 record. Now I'm going to make a movie. It's like nobody else has done that, and she does it really well. I love her voice too. I tend to love
her voice.
I love singers where in a bar who it is.
Yeah.
10 seconds of music, and you're absolutely certain that's Diana Ross, that's Cher, that's Linda Ronstadt, that's Natalie Merchant.
Yeah. We both got to work with Neil Diamond.
Yes.
What was your experience like? Tell me.
It was great. I was always a Neil fan. I always thought he was an underrated songwriter because, the whole this Neil, would distract people from Neil, the solitary man. Genius, and I love the record you did with him.
I think of him as like Bruce Springsteen before Bruce Springsteen in many ways in the early days.
Yes. Yeah, there's people now that we realize definitely are in the singer-songwriter category in the same way, going back further, Buddy Holly is, who had a vision of what their songs could be. And Neil's written so many, so great songs. And as I say, being a showbiz phenomenon as well as a musical phenomenon, something Dylan has studiously avoided, to the point where it almost is showbiz that he sings every song differently. You don't know what song you're doing. No, I admire Neil enormously. He's charming and
great singer too,
and great singer.
Yeah.
I mean, no, and I insisted as you did with getting him playing and singing, on the track, because that's the essence of the great Neil Diamond stuff, And the songs are so odd, they're not shaped normally.
No.
And they...
Even when you hear like the Monkey songs that he wrote, that you could tell it's a Neil Diamond song. It's so specific.
Exactly. And the hooks are all over the place. It's not... I mean, who would think that in Sweet Caroline, the hook turned out to be the instrumental ba 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 between the lines. That's the hook.
Part of the hook.
Everybody sings it,
know.
That's the one bit of the song everybody knows. It's full of hooks, The chorus itself is incredibly catchy and brilliant chorus. But you never get the impression he's trying to write a hit, but it's not that kind of hook.
Mm-mm.
It's not constructed that way. But it's genuinely brilliant songwriting, and some interesting lyric twists and stuff. Again, a bit like Buddy Holly, who would put weird words in a weird order. I mean, true love ways. What kind of a sentence is that, But it works as a song.
Yeah. Was Buddy Holly a big inspiration as well?
Yes. Yes, we were huge Buddy Holly fans in England. And one of my regrets is that I was 14 when he toured England. And I can't remember why I didn't go. Maybe I couldn't afford it. Maybe it was exam time. My parents wouldn't let me. Or it was got to be some mundane reason. And I remember thinking, well, I'll see him next time.
Yeah.
No, next time.
Yeah.
Because that would have been exciting. I'd like to be able to. I saw Elvis in Vegas when he first Vegas come back, and that was great. But I missed Buddy. Yeah, he was particularly
Tell me about
big
the
in
experience of going to see Elvis in Vegas. That sounds great. I never got to see Elvis.
It was great. Yeah, it was really good. He was already doing all the karate stuff and all that, but I mean, it wasn't quite like Mystery Train Elvis, who's probably my favorite Elvis of all.
Yeah.
But it was young and handsome and fit Elvis, and he was terrific. Sang great. Everything was fast at that particular era. The live versions were like cranking it in terms of BPM, no question. Ronnie Tutt, the great drummer, but they were racing through everything. But I suppose that it was just like the exciting live version, But
Yeah.
I remember thinking, that's a lot faster than the record.
And he played all the hits.
He played all the hits.
Yeah. Talk to the audience much in between songs?
Little jokey asides and stuff, as I recall, and sounded just like an Elvis imitation. But but I don't remember him saying much. Maybe just mentioning the song or who wrote it or something like that. Making fun with the band members. I mean, I remember Ronnie Tutt telling me, because he was subsequently on one of those tours when they started doing the 3D hologram thing. Not 3D, it wasn't really a hologram even. This was the first time they used Elvis on film and playing with the band because they separated the vocals. And Ronnie Tutt said that the weirdest part was that it was exactly like being on the road with Elvis. There was hardly any difference because they didn't see much of him on the road.
I see.
He hung with his friends, you know. And they even included the thing where he introduces the band by name.
Yeah.
So he'd go on drums, Ronnie Tutt, and Ronnie Tutt would stand up and bow. He said it was really spooky.
Amazing.
You know.
Oh, tell me about Steve Martin, because we didn't talk about Steve. How did it happen?
I've known Steve Martin off and on for a long time. And we kept running into each other and gradually became closer friends in the last few years. But I remember, he for example, opened for Linda in,
I didn't know
in
that.
the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach. I think I found an ad,
Amazing.
just doing stand-up. And, so I'd got to know him kind of gradually. And he's always been a banjo player I much admired. I love bluegrass banjo, and he's really good at it. So I was having dinner at his house in New York, and he was telling me that he had played me these banjo tunes before, actually, that he'd written, because he writes little instrumental pieces just for the fun of it, and he'd done the instrumental music for the New York Shakespeare Festival and things like that. But anyway, he'd played me some stuff, and I told him how good it was, and then he said, well, I've actually been playing some of it to Edie Brickell, who he didn't know particularly well, even though he and Paul Simon are close friends. But he said that he'd run into Edie and played her some of these bits and pieces. And she said, oh, I love that. Can I write some songs on it? And he said, yes, of course. And what she did was brilliant. We expected her to kind of essentially put lyrics and melody where necessary to the existing piece of music. But what she did was write a whole other melody that made the existing piece of music sound like the perfect accompaniment. So suddenly there was the banjo part being the accompaniment to this melody that Edie had written. And at a subsequent dinner, he played me that and said, what do you think? I said, I think it's great. And, you should make an album, because Edie's such a terrific singer. And said, we should turn this into an album. So he said, and I was on the plane home the next day when he emailed me and said, we're going to do it. Do you want to produce it? And I went, yes, yes, yes.
Great.
So essentially we did it pretty much banjo and click. It was very much assembled. So I'd get the perfect banjo bit and line things up a bit and then work on the vocal and add instruments as needed. So it's essentially like a bluegrass record. But I did things like I had Esperanza Spalding play bass on some of them.
Great.
Because I loved the idea of getting some jazz bass licks under a bluegrass banjo, which she loved as well. Because, there's some odd notes in there with the drone and things, which the bass has to account for. And then I put, some percussion on it, some strings in some instances. So it's not like a full-on bluegrass record. And Steve and Edie were cool. I was doing all that on my own. They were happy.
Great.
And Paul was happy, which counts for a lot.
Yeah.
Because Edie's, if your client's husband is one of the best songwriters and record producers of all time,
yes,
you do go, have you played it in the kitchen? And the answer is yes. And
I haven't heard his new album yet. I hear it's great.
I bet it is.
I hear it's great.
They're always amazing. Yeah. His last one was great. Yeah, so that was exciting. And, Edie's breathtaking, incredibly in tune, brilliant phrasing, very original. Again, totally idiosyncratic in delivery. You know right away who it is. So, she has this little band with Steve Gadd, the Gaddabouts.
It's great. I didn't know
sounds
that.
so good. They made an album or two just for the fun of it, I think. And I forget who else is in the... Pino Palladino.
Oh, he's incredible.
Who's a killer bass player.
Incredible.
And Steve Gadd and...
Have you heard Pino's solo album? It's ridiculously beautiful.
I haven't.
You'll love it. It's out. Beautiful.
I will listen.
It's him and Blake Mills together. It's
great.
so good.
Oh, great.
It's so good.
I'll listen to that for sure.
Yeah. Really adventurous, really jazzy.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he's extraordinary.
I love that D'Angelo Voodoo album, and he's the bass player on that.
Right.
It's unlike anything.
D'Angelo's incredible. Yeah.
Great album.
Cool.
Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for doing this. A pleasure
No, it's a
talking to you about
pleasure.
everything.
No, anytime if you want, anytime you want more, I
Cool.
can ramble on forever.
Fun.
It's good. You're a pleasure to talk to.